Good morning to baristas. This is going to be a response video, and normally I don't do response videos because that lets other people set the agenda. But in the context of some give and take, I've decided to do this in response to a video made by user Fringe Elements called The Myth of Civil Rights. I won't reproduce parts of it here, mainly because the account and his video were terminated before I could organize this response and use the statistics. The site itself was a knockoff of the Southern Poverty Law Center, containing in its channel description some pretty libelous reading statements. YouTube is known to get extremely sensitive about such things, so it's no surprise it became another of that user's throwaway channels. But I digress. No, I don't. Nor am I going to make gratuitous swipes at its creator, because I'm not a snot-nosed twerp. Rather, I'll focus on the issues raised, in particular the aspect of lynching. So, aside from the usual right-wing diatribes about the civil rights movement being part of international communism, a charge made obliquely, the video's creator wasn't fool enough to brazenly state that, the most controversial points were those related to lynching. This is a subject I've dealt on before, so once again I don't mind going into it here. The video also contained a graphic photograph of a lynching that caused the whole video to be age-restricted and was, I believe, a picture of the lynching of 3 men at Curve in Texas in 1922. Anyway, the gist of his rationalization was that the so-called justice meted out to the lynchees was comparable to that doled out by the legal system, as being no more unfair or disproportionate. That these lynching bees were affairs of honor avenged, that blacks were disproportionately perpetrating violent crimes, and thus received the greater portion of both legal convictions and extra-legal citizen enforcement. Justice was therefore served at the end of a rope in these cases, so what's the problem? Well, the problems are many, and we'll start with its crime statistics. There is no question that the bulk of felony convictions were visited upon blacks, north and south. The majority of violent crimes are committed by the lower classes, just as most white-collar crimes are found in boardrooms and business offices, and as most blacks of the period were in the lower classes, it stands to reason they would suffer convictions in greater numbers, both absolutely and proportionately. But the problem with conviction statistics is that they nicely ignore the decided bias in the legal system of the period that was much more severe on blacks and whites for the same crimes. Black-on-white crime was the most severely punished and the usual catalyst for lynching, while white-on-black crime was the most leniently treated category of offense, followed by black-on-black crimes, while only in white-on-white crimes was there anything approaching proportionality between crime and punishment, with the law operating according to full due process standards upon equals. And just as lynchers sometimes got the wrong man, so did the court system. There likely was no greater disparity in wrongful conviction as in wrongful lynching, as bias was an operative factor in both. Nor was the lynching victim necessarily an innocent victim. In making a survey of lynchings recorded in the 3 years between January 1st, 1930 and January 1st, 1933, there were in that period 40 completed lynchings and 127 attempted lynchings. Of the 40 full lynchings, only 4 were outside the southern United States, and by southern I include all slave-owning states as of the Civil War and or those of predominantly southern settlement and culture, including Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. Of the 44 known lynching victims, only 3 were white. Of the 127 attempted lynchings, and I'll refer to some notice statistics here. Of the 127 attempted lynchings for those 3 years, we find 5 occurring outside the southern USA, and whites comprising 23 of the potential victims, under 1/5 of the total. So we find that although there were whites lynched or threatened with lynching, and that even after the frontier period had long passed, non-southern states could still throw a good old-fashioned necktie party every now and then, the majority of lynching cases in those 3 years, when lynching was allegedly declining in the U.S., were southern, and the majority of those threatened with lynching were poor and black. In surveying the crimes for which they were lynched, we find that in roughly 85% of the cases, there was at least strong circumstantial evidence linking the lynchee to a felony crime, and that in the majority of cases, the mob did get the right man, or sometimes teenage boy, in the same proportion as the legal system. These crimes were, in order of frequency, and here we often have double counts, but I've broken them down for clarity. rape or attempted rape with 17 counts, murder with 11 counts, assault 4 counts, resisting an officer of the law 4 counts, no crime known 2 cases, robbery 2 counts, insulting a white woman 1 count, and bombing houses 1 count, this being a white male in Florida. Among the 127 attempted lynchings, the most frequent accusation was 67 accusations of murder, 52 of rape or attempted rape, 14 of assault, 4 for insulting and or making improper advances to a white woman, 3 accusations apiece for robbery and auto collision, 1 for threatening a white woman, and 1 for legally defending a black man accused of rape. But the main objection, both legal and moral, to lynching is not that the wrong person was lynched. Usually this was not the case, nor that due process was not applied, because though due process was denied, in the context of time and place, this didn't mean much due to the status of the victim. The latter consideration is, in fact, the main injustice of lynching. Lynching was a punishment reserved for those outside the pale, no pun intended, of society, an act of ritual revenge for the purpose of socially subordinating the victim and terrorizing those who shared his status to keep their place. The blood ritual nature of lynching was reinforced by the often grotesque tortures that accompanied the process, as graphically described in my description in an earlier video. Far from being affairs of honor, these were displays of mass dishonoring, where the desire to torture and murder was given a legal sanction by the criminal accusation and a social veneer by the community's right to inflict citizen justice. The overwhelming majority of all lynchings, attempted or completed, were in the South and involved blacks. But even where they did not, as on the western frontier, historically, we find that white victims were socially marginal fringe elements, while in South Texas in 1915, during the so-called San Diego Uprising, hundreds of Mexican descent males were summarily executed by Texas Rangers in what amounted to death squad executions. So, to attempt to rationalize lynching as no worse than state punishment is fundamentally mistaken as to the origin, nature, and purpose of lynching. There's no evidence that it deterred crime any more than state executions, but its overall purpose was to create a climate of terror among certain segments of the population, namely black males, that in effect was totalitarian, even if involving no bureaucracy, except for the occasional complicity of law enforcement officers. Uh-oh, knock upon the YouTube line. Let's check this out. Hello, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. What's going on? Ooh, there's a crackle on that line. You want to remind our North American viewers of Russia's great lynching traditions. It's unfair not to mention the pogrom as a source of popular violence on enemies of the Russian people, like Jews and Caucasians and Gypsies. Man, let me change gears. That crackle is bad. Ooh. Well, yeah, okay, but, we don't need to get in a Cold War pissing contest over it. All right, okay, I'll pass the word out and say hi to David Duke for you.